March 27, 1934. Advance Base Antarctica. Local time just past midnight, though night and day have stopped meaning much. The wind doesn't howl, it presses. A constant, crushing pressure against the metal walls of a small prefabricated hut buried under Antarctic snow. Inside, the air smells faintly of oil, damp wool, and something sharper, ozone from the generator cycling again. A single bulb swings slightly from the ceiling, its light dull, yellowed, tired. Admiral Richard Evelyn Bayard sits alone at a narrow desk. Not standing watch. Not issuing orders. Just sitting. 6 months ago, men saluted him. Newspapers printed his name in bold type. Back home, radios carried his voice across living rooms and diners. But here, 1,000 miles from the nearest human being, there is no one left to register his presence. No eyes. No acknowledgement. No echo. Outside, the temperature has dropped below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind-driven snow has sealed the entrance again. He will dig it out later, or not. Time has become negotiable. Bayard removes his gloves slowly. His fingers are stiff, swollen, clumsy. He flexes them once, then rests his hands flat on the desk. The movement feels ceremonial, though there is no one to see it. He listens. Not for danger, he's learned the sounds of the hut by now. The generator's uneven pulse, the faint metallic contraction of beams under cold stress, the whisper of snow settling. He listens for himself. At first, months ago, the silence had been unbearable. His mind reached outward automatically, searching for something, anything to confirm that he existed. He spoke aloud, narrating tasks, replaying conversations, rehearsing speeches he might give when he returned. But tonight something is different. The words don't come. Not because he's afraid. Not because he's empty. Because they feel unnecessary. He reaches for his journal. The leather cover is worn, softened by handling. This book has been his tether, proof that days are passing, that thoughts still occur, that someone somewhere might one day read them. He opens it. The page remains blank. Bayard's pen hovers, then lowers, ink touches paper. He writes a single sentence carefully. I am no longer compelled to explain myself. He stops. The sentence startles him, not with fear but with clarity. He sets the pen down. The silence that follows is heavier than before, but it doesn't press inward, it settles. This is the moment he does not yet have language for. Not loneliness. Not despair. Something quieter. For the first time since arriving at Advance Base, Bayard is not waiting for his own reflection. You can almost feel the psychological shift tightening the room. Up until now, every hardship, the cold, the isolation, the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning from the generator, had been endured with an imagined audience in mind. Future readers, future listeners, history. That invisible crowd had been keeping him upright. But somewhere between the 5th and 6th month alone, the mechanism slipped. It didn't break. It loosened. Bayard rises and moves to the small porthole window, scraping frost from the glass with a gloved thumb. Outside, the Antarctic plateau stretches endlessly, white layered on white, no horizon line, no reference point. Nothing to meet his gaze. He realizes with a faint sense of disorientation that he does not miss being seen. This is not resignation. His posture is still straight, his movements are deliberate, discipline remains, but the internal pressure, the need to register, has evaporated. From a Jungian perspective, this is not collapse, it is a withdrawal of projection. For most of a lifetime, the psyche learns to locate itself through mirrors, faces, responses, reactions. Identity becomes something confirmed externally, reinforced by reflection. But when those mirrors disappear completely, something unexpected can happen. The psyche doesn't dissolve. It reorganizes. Bayard feels it in his body before he understands it intellectually. A strange reduction in internal noise, thoughts arise more slowly. When they do, they feel finished, complete without rehearsal. He eats a simple meal: tinned meat, hard biscuit, melted snow boiled twice for safety. No commentary accompanies the process. No internal narrator describing the act. Hunger appears, hunger is satisfied, that's all. Later, lying on his cot, he stares at the ceiling. The old anxieties try to surface, questions about whether the expedition will be judged a success, whether history will remember the sacrifice, whether his suffering will be validated. They don't hold. The questions collapse under their own weight. Validated by whom? The realization does not arrive with drama, it does not announce itself, it simply becomes obvious the way cold becomes obvious only after you stop shivering. Being seen was never the point. It was a stage. And the stage has gone dark. Elsewhere on the ice, storms rearrange the surface of the continent, winds erase tracks that took days to carve. Antarctica does not preserve evidence, it removes it. Inside the hut, Bayad drifts toward sleep. And with that drift comes something more unsettling than fear. A sense of sufficiency. He is still Admiral Bayad, still an explorer, still a man with a past and a future, but none of that feels urgent, none of it needs reinforcement. The inner witness, long overshadowed by applause, expectation, legacy, has stepped forward quietly without ceremony. It does not praise him. It does not judge him. It simply remains. And in that remaining, something ancient stirs, a form of authority that does not ask to be recognized. The generator hums. The bulb flickers. The world continues without observing him. For the first time he allows it. And somewhere in that allowance a line is crossed, one that cannot be uncrossed. Morning arrives without announcement. No sunrise, just a subtle shift in the color of the cold light leaking through the frost-choked window. Bayad opens his eyes, already awake, unsure how long he's been there. Sleep, like everything else, has softened its boundaries. The generator has cut out sometime during the night. Silence fills the hut so completely it feels structural, like a second layer of insulation. Not absence but presence, thick, deliberate, unmoving. He sits up slowly. This is dangerous territory, he knows that. Without the generator, carbon monoxide risk drops, but so does heat. Fingers stiffen faster, thought can follow. He should act. Instead he waits. Not frozen, not indecisive, just still. Months earlier, such a pause would have triggered alarm. A man alone in Antarctica cannot afford hesitation. Every manual, every instinct trained into him by the Navy insists on motion, correction, response. But something in him has recalibrated. The urgency no longer spikes. When he finally moves, it is without commentary. He layers clothing, restarts the generator, checks the gauges. Each action unfolds in clean sequence, stripped of internal narration. There is no voice inside saying this matters. It simply does. Psychologists would later struggle to describe what happens to the human mind under prolonged, total isolation. Not solitude chosen for rest or reflection, but isolation with no witnesses, no feedback loops, no social gravity. The common assumption was deterioration. Hallucinations, panic, collapse. That does happen for some. But Bayad's journals describe something else entirely. A narrowing. A tightening of attention around what is real and immediate. Thoughts that once sprawled outward toward reputation, legacy, interpretation begin to retract, not suppressed, completed. From a Jungian perspective, this is what occurs when the persona, constructed for interaction, loses its function. The persona does not die. It goes dormant. And when it does, energy returns to the center. Bayad notices this first in his emotions. Fear no longer arrives pre-labeled. Cold is cold, hunger is hunger, risk is assessed without drama. There is no internal observer amplifying sensation for effect. Even memory behaves differently. Moments from his past surface without narrative arc, not as stories but as images, a ship's deck at dusk, a salute given and returned, a crowd blurred by distance. They pass through him without demand. No meaning required. One afternoon, if the word still applies, he steps outside the hut. The wind has calmed, the Antarctic plateau lies exposed, vast and indifferent. He stands there longer than he should. The cold bites through layers, but he does not rush back in. There is something he is testing. He turns slowly, scanning the horizon. Nothing moves. No birds. No shadows. No markers. He realizes that even if he raised his arms, even if he shouted until his lungs burned, nothing would register it. The thought should terrify him. It doesn't. Instead, a subtle release spreads through his chest. This is the moment when the need to be seen finally detaches from survival. For most of human history, being seen meant safety, tribe, witness, continuity. To go unobserved was to risk disappearance not just socially but existentially. But here, at the bottom of the world, that equation collapses. He exists whether or not he is perceived. And for the first time, that feels sufficient. Inside the hut that night, Bayed writes again. Not much, short entries, observations without interpretation. Wind steady, generator stable, appetite normal. No reflections, no philosophical framing. Yet beneath the restraint, something fundamental is shifting. Without an audience, even an imagined one, behavior loses its performative edge. Decisions are no longer rehearsed, reactions no longer polished. What remains is startlingly efficient. Jungian psychology suggests that when external mirroring disappears, the psyche turns inward not to ruminate but to re-anchor. The ego, long propped up by response and recognition, is forced to locate a deeper reference point. Not approval. Not validation. Orientation. Bayed begins to trust this orientation more than his thoughts. When fatigue arrives, he rests. When alertness sharpens, he works. No moral overlay, no internal negotiation. Time passes differently. Days blur not because they are forgotten, but because they are complete unto themselves. There is a cost to this shift. He feels it one evening as he replays a memory of home, a dinner table, voices overlapping, laughter erupting without cause. For a brief moment, a pang cuts through the stillness. Not longing. Dislocation. The realization that returning to that world will require translation. That something acquired here may not fit back there. The thought lingers longer than usual. For the first time since arriving, he wonders not whether he will survive, but whether he will be able to explain what survival has done to him. The question has no answer yet. But it marks the next threshold. Because once the inner witness becomes sufficient, the outer world begins to feel loud. And the silence you earned here does not dissolve when others return. It follows you. Weeks later, perhaps more, perhaps less, Bayed notices something subtle begin to erode. Not his strength. Not his discipline. Expectation. It doesn't vanish all at once, it thins, like ice melting from below, unseen until a surface gives way. He wakes one cycle and realizes he had not anticipated the day ahead. No mental checklist, no imagined obstacles, no internal rehearsal of outcomes. The absence is so complete it almost alarms him. Almost. He tests himself the way a trained officer would. He introduces small variables, delays meals, alters routines, waits longer before tending the generator, watches for anxiety to spike. It doesn't. The mind no longer leaps forward to meet the future. It meets only what arrives. This is not apathy, his logs remain precise, his actions remain exacting. But the emotional charge once attached to being right, being effective, being worthy, that current has drained away. From a Jungian perspective, this marks a rare psychological crossing. The ego no longer requires constant confirmation of its position in the world. When that happens, the psyche stops echolocating. Most people live as if sound must bounce back to prove space exists. We speak, act, decide, then wait for the return signal, approval, resistance, recognition, even conflict. Here there is no return. The signal travels outward and disappears. And the mind adapts. One evening, Bayed sits at the desk again, hands folded, eyes unfocused. He is not tired, he is not thinking. The state would be difficult to describe later, not meditation, not dissociation. Presence without commentary. A memory surfaces not of triumph but of instruction, a naval training room, a senior officer explaining command presence. You don't fill silence, the man had said, you let it gather. Bayed had nodded at the time, filing the phrase away as doctrine. Only now does he understand it. Silence, when unchallenged, gathers weight. And weight creates authority. Not authority over others, but over one's own reactions. The most profound change announces itself quietly. Emotion no longer needs justification. Fear appears and passes without story. Contentment arises without explanation. Even moments of melancholy drift through without hooking into identity. He is not sad. Sadness visits. He is not strong. Strength functions. This distinction, barely perceptible at first, becomes unmistakable. The self has loosened its grip. Not vanished. Not diminished. Unburdened. Outside, a storm rolls across the plateau, flattening snowdrifts, erasing contours. Bayed watches from the doorway longer than is safe. Wind lashes his parka, ice needles sting exposed skin. He feels small, but not insignificant. There is a difference. Smallness used to threaten meaning. To be small was to be overlooked, forgotten, erased. Here, smallness feels accurate. The continent does not respond to him, and he no longer expects it to. This is the turning point most people never reach, not because it is inaccessible, but because it requires something nearly impossible in ordinary life: the complete removal of mirrors. No feedback. No audience. No correction. Only duration. Only endurance. Only the self stripped of its need to be confirmed. Bayed begins to understand why this experience cannot be shared easily. Words would reintroduce reflection, language would summon an audience, explanation would rebuild the very structure that had fallen away. To describe it would undo it. He closes the journal more often now without writing. Not because there is nothing to say, but because saying is no longer the primary mode of being. This silence is not emptiness. It is density. And it will not leave him. Far from civilization, the psyche has completed a cycle it usually only begins. The need to be seen has not been denied. It has been satisfied internally. And once that happens, the outer world, crowded, reactive, echoing, can never fully reclaim its former hold. Bayed does not know it yet, but the most difficult part of the expedition lies ahead. Not survival here, but return. The relief crew arrives as sound before shape. A low mechanical thrum carried across the ice. Engines, metal, movement, the first foreign noise in months. Bayed hears it from inside the hut and freezes. Not with fear. With disorientation. The noise feels intrusive, not threatening but excessive, like light after darkness. He realizes with faint surprise that his body does not lean toward it. It braces. He steps outside anyway. The plane cuts through the white distance, growing larger, louder, undeniable. Men disembark in heavy gear, faces obscured by goggles and frost. One of them raises an arm and waves. A gesture meant to close distance. Bayed lifts his own arm in response, executing the motion cleanly, correctly. The habit is intact. But something crucial is missing. The internal surge, the confirmation loop, is gone. He is being seen again. And it does nothing. Handshakes follow, voices, laughter that sounds slightly forced against the vastness. Questions come quickly. How was it? Were you ever afraid? Did it get lonely? Bayed answers sparingly. Not evasively. Not cryptically. Just efficiently. He watches the men as they speak, noticing details he would have missed before. The subtle leaning forward when they ask questions. The way each waits unconsciously for his reaction to shape their own. They want the story. He can feel it. The old version of himself would already be assembling it, selecting moments, shaping tension, anticipating admiration or concern. But the machinery doesn't engage. The story does not coalesce. On the journey back north, surrounded by others again, the contrast sharpens. Conversations overlap, opinions cascade, each remark invites response, alignment, rebuttal. The social echo chamber spins back to life around him. And for the first time, Bayed notices how exhausting it is. Not the people. The constant mirroring. From a Jungian perspective, this is the cost of returning from individuation into society. The persona must be reactivated, but it no longer fits as snugly as before. The inner witness has taken precedence. And the persona once primary now feels loud. Performative. Thin. In the months that follow, journalists request interviews, lectures are scheduled, his name circulates again, attached to adjectives: heroic, visionary, resilient. Bayed delivers the talks. He answers the questions. But those close to him sense a change they cannot articulate. He pauses longer before speaking. He stops mid-sentence if the words feel ornamental. He no longer fills silence. And when applause arrives, it lands softly, registers, then passes through without sticking. Some mistake this for detachment. Others call it humility. Neither is quite right. What has changed is the location of authority. It no longer sits in reaction. It sits in alignment. Late one evening, long after the public attention has shifted elsewhere, Bayed stands alone again, this time not in Antarctica but in a quiet room stateside. The silence here is different, thinner, interrupted by distant life, but the inner stillness remains. He recognizes it now. This is the moment the title gestures toward. The day being seen became optional. Not irrelevant. Optional. He understands, finally, that the expedition did not merely test endurance or courage. It stripped away the reflex to locate selfhood in reflection. What remained did not need reinforcement. Only maintenance. Most people never encounter this shift so cleanly. Modern life is dense with mirrors, screens, voices, metrics, responses. Even solitude is usually perforated by imagined audiences. But once the psyche has learned that it can exist without being observed, something irreversible occurs. You can return. You can participate. But you are no longer dependent. Bayed never announces this realization. He doesn't need to. It expresses itself in restraint. In silence. In the absence of urgency to be understood. And that absence paradoxically becomes his quiet power. The Antarctic wind no longer presses against him. But the inner stillness it carved remains. And it will remain for the rest of his life.